that portion of the evening where I get the honor of inviting our keynote speaker to the podium. And I'm going to be honest, I'm asking you personally to give her your undivided attention, because I've been in this position when people are leaving and exiting, and it's almost somewhat anticlimactic. Really, be attentive, pay attention. We're here. Sister Alia, who is, among other things, a family friend of ours, alhamdulillah, dedicated community activist in our community for many years. She's Deputy Director of the Inner City Muslim Action Network. Sister Alia is responsible for overseeing the organization's development and communications functions, and engaging other organizations and institutions around strategic programs and initiatives. She's a very revered public speaker, and we are so happy to have her this evening. Please join me in welcoming Sister Alia Bilal to the roster.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. I begin in the name of the Creator, the most merciful, the most gracious. I ask that the Creator send blessings and peace upon all of our prophets, our messengers, our sages, our wise women and men, and upon all of our ancestors and everyone in this room today. I begin in gratitude to the Most High for bringing us all together after what seems like a very, very long time. And at Iman, we have adopted the practice that was gifted to us by our indigenous family of beginning by acknowledging that the land that we are standing on, that we are living on, we are benefiting from, is stolen land. And that the original caretakers of this land poured their love, poured their good into this land many generations ago and still do today. Among the many nations that call this land their home are the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. And so I begin by also acknowledging the legacy that they live today. We also acknowledge that the cities and the states that we are living in would not be possible without the forced labor of African enslaved people. People like my grandparents' grandparents, who built this nation on their backs, whose descendants still live with the consequences of unjust and inhumane systems today. And in many ways is the reason why we have so much work to do today. And with that, Assalamu alaikum. You all, after the dinner that we just had and the beautiful evening that we just had, I'm going to need a little more energy than that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace and blessings be upon you all. I am so honored to be speaking before you today. I want to thank the CIOGC and especially its fearless leader and someone that has known me for more years than I can count, Brother Abdullah Mitchell, for inviting me to speak. And I want to thank the staff and the board of the CIOGC for bringing us all together after so long. Many of you may not know that CIOGC actually gave me my first internship in college. And at the time, the council was under the leadership of another gentleman that has known me for longer than I know, Dr. Abdul Malik Mujahid, who was honored earlier today. At that time, I worked on the council newsletter, which was still paper back then. And I cut my teeth on interacting with the dignitaries and elected officials that we brought to these kinds of dinners. I still have fond memories of that office on State Street, and I still remember the very first day that Sister Rita Sutton was hired as the office manager for the council. I've since learned that she has retired after 13 long years with the council, and that makes me realize that I really am getting older. Nevertheless, to then be asked by the council to speak at this event, an event that I used to help to organize, is certainly an honor and a blessing. We've been through a lot over the last 2 years, a lot that was certainly unexpected. Life and business plans that had to be halted or rerouted. We've had to pivot and learn to adjust. We've had to learn new ways of communicating with one another. We've gotten used to, I think, what was referenced earlier, the Brady Bunch style of meeting. And all of our eyes have probably aged 10 years or so in the last 2 years because of all the screen time that we have given ourselves. And now, many of us are learning how to be back in space with one another once again. We're not sure if we're hugging yet, if we're doing the respectful Muslim hand on the heart thing. It's been an adjustment. We've also had to find peace in solitary worship, to listen to our lectures and our classes online, to pray our Tarawih night prayers during Ramadan at home. And then we rediscovered how much we actually loved our community the first time that many of us were able to go to a Eid prayer in public this year. We've also had to adjust to life without certain people in it. Many of us have lost loved ones in the last 2 years, both to COVID and to other causes. Shortly after COVID upended everything, our world was shaken once again by the murder of a Black man by a police officer in Minneapolis. We saw an uprising, and for some of us, we saw parts of our society wake up to the reality that many of us had known all along, even in our own community. And even before COVID, we had had to contend with a man who was elected to the highest political office in our country, who had no regard for decent human life or values, let alone the Constitution. And we have had to face some of the most polarizing, dehumanizing, and disturbing rhetoric that many of us have heard for decades on a public platform. And even though a new administration has swept in and polished the Oval Office image once again, we know that the rhetoric and the dangerous ideals that have fueled that sentiment are still alive and quite well in this country. But while we have certainly experienced a lot of change in the last 2 years, there have also been some constants. And those constants are what I believe make our community what it is. One of my favorite hadiths, one of my favorite narrations from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is one that happens right after he makes the migration to Medina. And he arrives into the city of Medina along with these Meccan refugees, and this new community has welcomed him with open arms. And the first thing he says when he enters Medina is this: Ya ayyuhan nas, أفشوا السلام وأطعموا الطعام وصلوا الأرحام وصلوا بالليل والناس في النيام تدخلوا الجنة بسلام. O people, spread peace, feed people, uphold the ties of kinship, and pray during the night when people are sleeping, and you will enter paradise with peace. And in a crisis that was unprecedented for most of us in our lifetime, Our community rose to that occasion spectacularly. I remember one of my very first calls right after the lockdown happened last year. I was invited to join a call that was led by the Mecca Center. And there were a number of other organizations on that call. And immediately, that group began organizing care packages and grocery deliveries and homemade masks and drop-offs to seniors in the community all over the Chicagoland area. And that was happening everywhere. Muslims were identifying areas of high need and filling those needs as best as they could. The CIOGC itself became a hub for this for the past 2 years, helping to facilitate thousands of pounds of groceries being distributed to our community, helping to facilitate over $1 million of rental and utility assistance. You see some of those details on the pages on your table. I saw youth groups that were organizing letters and notes to send to elders in the community, spreading love, spreading peace, reminding them that their community is with them. And in the aftermath of the brutal murder of George Floyd, I saw our community rise in ways I never thought that I would. I saw some aunties and uncles speaking up online about the racism at play in our communities. I saw the boards of masajid speaking up, finally listening to members of their congregations who've been voicing feelings of alienation and experiences of racism for years. I saw diversity, equity, and inclusion committees springing up in mosques across the region, and panel conversations centering the voices of Black community members talking about their experiences. I was pleased when I got the announcement that CIOGC was launching an anti-racism task force and beginning the work with mosques and schools and institutions to raise awareness about the racism at play in our spaces. Iman is a proud member organization of the Community Collaboration Initiative led by the Radish Family Fund and the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. And I was proud to see that the anti-racism training that was created by close friends of Iman and the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative was an embedded part of that initiative, as it is in the Council's Anti-Racism Task Force. When called to it, our community responds. But in order for us to become truly resilient, our community must learn to respond before disaster strikes. There's a powerful documentary that I would encourage everyone here to watch. It's called Cooked, Survival by Zip Code. And at its surface, it's about the 1995 heat wave in Chicago that killed almost 1,000 people. And of course, the majority of those people were poor, elderly, and Black. At its core, though, the documentary is about the racism and the bigotry inherent in a system that allows and creates the conditions of abject poverty, poor health, social isolation of some of the most vulnerable people in our cities. It's asking the question of whether this incident in 1995 was indeed a freak accident or if it was something more pernicious, something more systemic. And if anyone is actually still asking themselves that question, we received our answer last year when this pandemic wreaked utter devastation on low-income Black and Latino communities at staggeringly different proportions to those of all of our other counterparts. And as we know, it wasn't just the disease that killed people, it was all of the underlying conditions that Black and Latino communities have faced. Crowded homes, the inability to stay and shelter in place when that meant no food on the table. And it questions the disaster relief model that we've become accustomed to. A terrible flood happens in Pakistan and aid is rushed into the region. An earthquake hits Haiti and aid floods into the island. The state of Texas loses power in the middle of winter and relief packages pour into Texas. All necessary reactions, necessary responses. But how many of us know how Haiti is doing now? How many of us, have any idea how well Puerto Rico was able to build after all of the hurricanes that they faced? The current model is to flood a disaster zone with relief and then to pull out once the worst of the disaster is over. For us to become a truly resilient community, we have to be making real impact in the most vulnerable communities and neighborhoods before the floods, before the hurricanes, the heat waves, or the pandemics hit us. And what does that look like? In Chicago and the US in general, we're blessed to have organizations, institutions like the Islamic Relief USA, who are not only responding to disasters overseas, but who are actually investing in models like Iman, who are trying to build resilience into the very bones of neighborhoods like Inglewood and Chicago in Chicago. You have agencies like the Zakat Foundation, who are doing the same thing through incredible efforts like the Khalid Center. Our prophet urged us to spread peace and feed people. And feeding people is always beautiful and always necessary, especially in times like these. And many of you, know that in Iman 20 years ago, we used to host a food pantry, and that was actually one of the things that we were most known for at that time. Many of you actually were probably a part of those early efforts. And you also may know that several years later, we decided to shut down the food pantry. We decided to start working on the root causes of food insecurity. And then 15 years later, a pandemic hit, and we decided to open up another food pantry so that we could meet our community where it was at. Feeding people will always be a good thing. But when will we, as a community, make it our mission to make food insecurity a thing of the past? In a country that wastes 108 billion pounds of food every year, we can afford to feed everyone in it. And in a community with doctors and lawyers and engineers and artists and educators, we have some of the most brilliant minds that could and should be put to use figuring out how to end hunger in the city. Now, the Prophet, peace be upon him, also urged us to uphold the ties of kinship. And of course, in the narration above, the Prophet speaks of al-arham, the womb connection, so blood relatives. But if the ummah is supposed to be as one body, such that when one limb hurts, the rest of the body is in pain, to me, that's even closer than kinship. Throughout the years, Iman has received constant requests from very beautiful people, from masajid, from schools, youth groups to come to Iman to do service projects. And they asked to come to a neighborhood cleanup project, they asked to participate in a backpack drive, or to help paint a local school. I learned about CIOGC's Social Justice Service Challenge last year, and I know that there were several beautiful projects proposed, and I know that some are thriving, and I know that there's some that probably, inshallah will happen at some point. But I want to propose something that I know may sound a little controversial. When it comes to social justice, I think that we should expunge this notion of service from the work that entails. And let's face it, when we're talking about social justice, we are usually talking about justice for one of the communities that's faced the most egregious forms of injustice in this country, and that's Black Americans. So, with the few of us that are left in here, can I be honest with you? Do I have permission to be honest with you?
Yes.
The Black community does not need your service.
Do you need like the car key or your room key?
It needs your solidarity. The Black community does not need your service. It needs you to work with us to dismantle the systems that create such vast disparities between us to begin with. As some of you know, I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago in a predominantly black neighborhood. But I was also raised in Bridgeview, Illinois. I am a proud product of Little Palestine, and I grew up on my best friend's mother's Hyderabadi Indian home cooking. So this is my family. The people in... And family shows up for one another, but family is honest with one another too. And if I'm being honest, I think that being service-minded when it comes to righting some of the terrible wrongs that are here in our society is part of what allows these wrongs to flourish. I think the idea that any of us could live a good life, could earn a good income, could send our children to good schools, and once or twice a year give us a cat check to an organization in charity, and feel confident that we did our job on earth is misguided. A smile is charity, but justice is flawed. Justice is obligatory, and we are supposed to be a community of justice. There's a beautiful organization that just opened up recently, led by pioneers in our American Muslim community, some of whom I believe were here today. And I had the honor of attending the ribbon cutting for this organization. It's the Saran Community Wellness Center. And they have this beautiful model of trying to create holistic healing in Southside communities, much like Iman's. I recently got word that they were urgently searching for a Muslim attorney to help them with some pro bono legal work. And I just thought, how many Muslims do we have in the Chicagoland area that are attorneys? I can guarantee that when this building, when this room was filled, we had at least 100 Muslim attorneys. We should be pouring our resources into this effort, pouring it. About a year ago, I received an email from one of our staple Southside Masajid, alerting us that a beloved community member of theirs had been shot and killed, and that they needed to frantically raise funds for the brother's janazah. And again, I thought, where is the waqf? Where is the endowment for that? Every single person in our community should have the dignity of a proper burial, no matter what zip code they're from, no matter how they died. And this is literally an amana. It's a sacred trust. It's literally a fard kifaya. It's a communal obligation. It's not a fard kifaya for Black Muslims to bury Black Muslims and for Pakistani and Palestinian Muslims to bury Pakistani and Palestinian Muslims. It's a fard kifaya for all of us. We may all have to answer someday for the countless Muslims who were buried not according to their tradition because they simply couldn't afford to do otherwise. How will we build a resilient community when we don't have some of the basics down? We just commemorated the 20th anniversary since September 11th, and as I'm sure many of you do, I still remember, palpably, the fear that I felt as a high schooler at an Islamic school in Bridgeview, learning that there were bomb threats against my school. I remember feeling like a target whenever I drove out of my cozy, mostly Black community on the south side of Chicago into the predominantly white south suburbs every day for school. Suburbs where Muslim businesses had been vandalized, where scarves had been pulled off of women's heads, where 300 protesters had formed a ring around our masjid, waving American flags and shouting, "Death to Arabs, death to Muslims." 20 years is a long, and yet it's no time at all, because we know that the hateful sentiments displayed 20 years ago are still influencing people and policy today. It may feel like we're in the middle of a political reprieve of sorts at the moment, but there's no telling what next year will bring and what kind of administration will take over next. But when I think about 9/11 and the fear that I felt then, I also think about April 2010, when a man on Chicago's Marquette Park neighborhood was arrested for killing 5 of his family members. And, it was after, of course, he converted to Islam in prison and allegedly claiming that Allah had made him do it. I worked at Iman by then, and instead of the fear that I expected to feel, as, of course, the public gaze in Chicagoland once again turned towards Islam and Muslims, I felt hope. Because as soon as the murders happened, and the first inklings of the fact that this man had any kind of connection to Islam and Muslims came out into the headlines, our community on the south side of Chicago came to us. And they didn't come to us waving American flags and shouting death to Muslims. They came to us saying, what can we do? Because they were Black, our community is diverse. But it's because there was no way for people to associate Muslims with murder when they see Muslims on a daily basis as a community of people that stands with them. And for me, that makes our mandate even more clear. Our faith is about justice. It's about bringing hearts together, enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. And to do that in our context here in Chicagoland, USA, we've got to see it in our self-interest as a community to be collectively on the forefront of fighting every injustice this world throws at us. In February of next year, inshallah, Iman and our partners in Inglewood are going to be cutting the ribbon on a development that we've been building towards for the last 25 years, and many of you have been on this path with us. It's a fresh market in the heart of Inglewood that will be a model of what a thriving, healthy, holistic business can look like in the inner city. One that models the powerful relationships between Black and Brown, between Black and Arab, between Muslims and people of other faiths, when those relationships are focused on what we need to do as a community to make our spaces more dignified. When we open the doors on February 17th, and I hope you will put that date on your calendar, I hope that many of you will, but more importantly, I hope that you will all see this as a collective win. Not just for the south side of Chicago, not just for Inglewood, but a win for the Muslim community. Tonight, CIOGC is celebrating 29 years. And I hope that by its 35th anniversary, our Muslim family will be cutting the ribbon on a dozen innovative, cutting-edge initiatives designed to be solutions to some of our most pervasive social problems. That is my prayer. And finally, perhaps the most powerful part of the hadith that I quoted above. After spread peace, feed people, and uphold the ties of kinship, is the instruction to pray during the night when others are sleeping. I once had the blessing of sitting in a session with Dr. Sherman Jackson. It stuck with me till this day. He said, if you are doing this during the day, but not during doing this, then you are not going to be successful. And that for me says everything. Our struggles are not over. and they will not be over until we're gone. But part of being resilient is being a foundation upon which all of us are safe, healthy, thriving, and able to find peace in this world and the next. CIOGC, I know, will remain a critical part of how that happens. I pray that you will continue to give this organization your prayers and your financial support. Keep the checks rolling in. I think I still saw some space on their thermometer that they need to fill. And finally, I just want to use this opportunity to also remind people about an important effort that you can be a part of right now. The Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, ISPU, and UIC have been conducting, intending to generate data about our Illinois Muslim community. And the point of that is to better serve our community. We need to know what our community is facing. So I urge IllinoisMuslims.org to fill out the survey, be counted, and inshallah add that to the list of things that you do this year to show up for your Muslim family and ensure our resilience as a community. With that, good night everyone. Jazakumullah khairan.